Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. This is a quick video response to an incompetent scholar who is damaging the reputation of Western Quranic scholarship. He is refoiling the mistrust Muslims have on Orientalist works on the Quran. Viewers are already familiar with his incompetence, negligence, carelessness in his research, which is propelled by a polemical motivation instead of honest research in the field of Quranic manuscripts. You can't do academic level research on the field of the Quran unless you have a firm grounding of the Arabic language. When it comes to studying manuscripts for correction studies, anyone who has a good eyesight can spot changes done to the parchment or the leaf, where there is an erasure or an overwritten text or additional text with a different nib. But then to go on and suggest what the original intended meaning may have been requires reading and understanding of the text before you make any proposed suggestions. If your knowledge of Arabic is pretty basic on a beginner's level, you're bound to make childish mistakes. So in academic scholarship, we hope that the bar is raised when it comes to Quranic scholarship. So let's move on into the subject today. It's going to be a quick video, inshallah. Obviously you have here, you can see in the slides, I'm proposing the scribe is quite competent, but the reader, who you see in the picture, is quite incompetent. So just recently, a few days ago, he published a video about the British Library manuscript 2165 and went through a particular page just to walk through it and gave some examples. I'm going to focus on one particular example, demonstrating what I'm going to highlight in detail, exactly what the problems are. So let's first introduce this particular scholar himself, saying what this issue is all about in the manuscript page.
Let's move up just here 2 lines, and this is once again an erasure of an aleph, and the text as it stands without what has been erased does match the rasam that is standard, and you can see it is in the kuriya, in the passive sense, is recited. However, if we look at the way that this was first written with the aleph in this manuscript, the verb ikra takes a different form. One of the ways that it could read is, and when I recite the Quran, which is a very interesting formulation. It's certainly not the way that the rasam reads today, but it would make sense in a different way. In other words, the verse would read, when I recite the Quran, listen to it and remain silent so that you may receive compassion, rather than as it is today, when the Quran is recited in the passive sense, listen to it and remain silent. So makes sense. It's interesting that this manuscript was first written that way. I don't know if that was the intended meaning by the person who wrote it down, but that is how it was first written.
So we've heard, and really, what can I say? So let's just go through some of the observations. He's proposing that the original could have read I recite in the first person. So presumably he's trying to say the alif at the beginning, which is erased, would be the alif of aqra. Of course, that means I recite. And he makes the case that this looks quite interesting and it makes sense to him because that reading would be meaningful. And didn't notice that the suggestion he's making is pretty much something that, a basic beginner in Arabic language would not make, as to what the text itself is written as it is. So before I go into detail breaking down the problems with these readings or incompetence in reading, this subject illustrates an example of the hamzated verbs, in Arabic known as al-fi'l al-mahmuz, or in plural al-af'al al-mahmuza, where if you have a triliteral verb like the example here, qara'a, so the last letter is a hamza. Okay, So you have a hamzated verbs, and this is a hamza which is mutatarrif at the end, hamza al-mutatarrifa. So when we have a hamza at the end of a verb, these actually follow certain morphophonic changes, as we know, those who have studied the science of imla. And at this stage, I propose those who are struggling, like this particular scholar himself, get a book like this. Okay, this is Kitabu al-Imla'i al-Ta'limi أسلوب متميز في تعليم الإملاء by Dr. Shawki al-Ma'arri, published in Dimashq in 2002. So to illustrate further, so you have this word قراءة, قاف, را here, and hamza. And as you can see, the final form of this can be different depending on, of course, the context, the persons, the numbers. We're talking about morphophonic changes. So you can be on the alif, the hamza can sit on top of the alif, or on the ya, or on the waw, or on just kursi in itself, or without a kursi. There's various ways you can write it. In fact, the verb qara'a is actually quite standard when it comes to learning this verb conjugation. So this is the perfect active case here. If it was in the passive voice, you'll say quri'a. And you do notice here how this verb, this particular last letter is written, and the quri'a, the hamza, is written over alif maqsura. And previously, when you looked at it, it was sitting on an alif, the hamza sitting on the alif here. If you have the mudari' form, you say yaqra'u. So you can see the form aqra', how it's different from quriya, and with the final form changes specifically. So it's quite standard. In fact, this verb is used to students to learn this verb conjugation in this form. And this is the qaida of the hamza al-mutatarrifa. This is the hamza mutatarrifa which is tuktab fi akhir al-kalima, at the end of. So if you have a hamza at the end of a word, then these are the principles. It's called al-hamza al-mutatarrifa. So what we have to do is, in its written form, we look at the harf alladhi qablaha, look at the letter just before it. فإذا كان ما قبلها ساكنا تكتب على السطر. So if the letter before it is sakin, then you actually write it on the satar, on the line itself, without واو يا ألف مقصورة. وإذا كان ما قبلها مفتوحا تكتب على الألف. So if it has like a fatha letter preceding it, you write on top of an alif. وإذا كان ما قبلها مضموما تكتب على الواو. So if you have before a letter which has a dhamma, then you write on top of a waw. And وإذا كان ما قبلها مكسورا تكتب على الألف المقصورة. Before a letter which is preceded with a kasra, like in our case قرئ, it will be written on alif al-maqsura. So it's not going to be written on alif, but alif al-maqsura, which is like a shape of a ya without the dots, right? And of course, if it's connected with some dhamir pronouns, then it works like hamza al-mutawassita, the middle hamza, and there are separate rules for this too. So let's just move on to understand the problem that we have seen in his reading. So here, وَإِذَا, so you have the alif, dal, and alif, وَإِذَا, and there was an alif that he's saying it's been erased, and قُرِيَ, قاف, ra, and this is the alif al-maqsura all the way, as you can see, connected to the waw. This is how the writing style was in these particular manuscripts. The ya, alif al-maqsura, they will just elongate it at the, like this shape. Al-Qur'an, so here's the word Qur'an. So as you can see here, something has been erased here, and the scholar is proposing that this was an alif. Okay, so if this is alif proposed, I'm not going into detail as to when this was erased, whether it was actually erased by the same scribe. Now, can you read this particular word as I recite أقرأ? You can't recite أقرأ in any way, shape or form based on the fact that you have an alif maqsura here, because if it was an alif here where the hamza is supposed to be, then you can say أقرأ. But this particular shape form, alif maqsura, or the ya-like shape, will prevent us from reading أقرأ, because this is only used for those particular word forms when the one preceding that will have a kasra, so it would be قُرِئَ. So of course this initial intention of the scribe was قُرِئَ, because this is what this alif maqsura, or the ya-like shape, determines the reading. So it's possible, I mean, one can have various reasons why the scribe may have mistakes. Scribe possibly was trying to write وَإِذَا قُرِئَ, and then instead of writing قُرِئَ, he started writing Al-Quran, thinking that he may have written قُرِئَ. So this is the alif of Al-Quran here, and then momentarily realized that he missed this قُرِئَ, just erased it and carried on. So the scribe, of course, is quite competent here, and we can see, and I will demonstrate to you from the examples that we see in this British Library manuscript, where other examples demonstrate the scribe's competency, and at the same time our incompetency of our scholar who's trying to make suggestions of what the original reading is. So if we were to see several examples from the same manuscript, I don't have to go any further in other manuscripts. So this is again from the folio 76V in Surah 26 199 ayah. I've highlighted the portion here. Let's just zoom it in. So you can see here, this is the word here is fa, qaf, ra, and then alif here and the ha here. فَقَرَأَهُ. Of course, one thing I need to mention it, the way that we write now in terms of hamza, we have a specific signs for hamza. In the early Quranic manuscripts, hamza wasn't written as hamza. As you can see, hamza would have just been written where it would be normally sitting. So it would be just an alif or a waw or a ya or alif maqsura, or just its kursi on its own. So here is an example of فَقَرَأَهُ. So this is what is referring to your hamza here, and this form has changed within this phonemic conjugation because of the way it is conjugated. If you go to another example here in folio 42V of the same manuscript, Surah Al-Isra 17 ayah 106, and you can see here وَقُرْآنًا فَرَقْنَاهُ لِتَقْرَأَهُ. So here lam, ta, qaf, ra, again the hamza here, or the alif, and the ha, لِتَقْرَأَهُ. So as you can see again how the hamza, the form of it's in this particular way. If you go to another example in the same manuscript, in the same surah, in ayah 93, this is where this occurs. I'm going to zoom it in, and you can see here it says نَقْرَأُهُ. So again, the form here, it's not on an alif but with a waw. Now, of course, someone who's a student of Arabic with a very, very elementary knowledge of Arabic language will be very confused at saying, why is this, even though naqra, I'm reading ra with a fatha, but the hamza is now taking place in the form of a waw? Why is this rather than an alif? If they didn't know the rules, of course they'll make mistakes, but if you know the rules, the hamza al-mutatarrifa becomes al-mutawassita here, and it takes these rules. Okay, I don't want to go into this detail, but that's because of the rules. It has this waw. If you take another example in the same surah in ayah 71, it occurs here in the underlined red, and you can see here it says فَأُولَئِكَ فَأُولَمْ, and then it says ya qafra waw, and this is the noon here, يَقْرَؤُونَ فَأُولَئِكَ يَقْرَؤُونَ. So again, as you can see, ra maftuha, and then you have the waw for the wu sound of the hamza here. Another example from the same surah, ayah 45, just in this underlined space, and if you were to zoom this in, and you can see here it says وَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ. So وَإِذَا, and then qaf ra, and then you have this alif there and the ta, قَرَأْتَ, as you can see here, this form of alif. Another example in the same surah, ayah 14, this occurs in this folio at this position. If you were to zoom in, and you can see here it says اقرأ كتابك. This is in the في الأمر form. اقرأ كتابك كفى. So here alif or hamza qaf ra, and then you have this hamza again or alif. Now if you go to Surah 16 in ayah 98 in folio 37V, by the way all the slides have the folio numbers if you have noticed, and in this position underlined by red, and if you were to go and you will see here again فَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. So this is a very familiar ayah to most of you. So you can see here قَرَأْتَ, so you have qaf ra and then the hamza here and the ta there. Okay, another example in Surah Yunus, Surah number 10, 94 in folio 18V. This is occurs in at the end of the line, at the beginning of the line the word is split, quite usual in early Quranic manuscripts. And you can see, let me remove myself further up. So fas'al, so fas'al alladhina yaqra, so ya qaf ra and waw and nun, yaqra'una al-kitaba min qablik. So you can clearly see here yaqra'una in this form of the waw. Now we've seen several examples. Does this scribe have a consistent pattern, consistency in writing the hamza, or the what would be the hamza? If we were to go to some examples in folio 25V of the same manuscripts, Surah Yusuf, Surah number 12, ayah 53 occurs here in this folio. If we were to zoom in, you can see here it says وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمْرَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. This is the ayah. So وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ, so wa mim alif and alif bara, and here is your alif maqsura ubarri'u. So you can clearly see the alif maqsura is used because the ra has a kasra. So according to the rules of hamzated verbs, you should have a alif maqsura here. It should not sit or be written as a waw or an alif, but like this ubarri'u. One final example, if you see in Surah Yunus ayah 41 in folio 16V of the same manuscript, okay, وَلَكُمْ عَمَلُكُمْ أَنْتُمْ بَرِيئُونَ وَأَنَا بَرِيءٌ مِمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. So here nun tabim and bara, and you can see here a kursi bari'un, because the word bari is preceded by a ra, has a kasra, and then you have an ya as well following by this waw sound. So this is why it's connected with this bari'un. And wa'na bari'un, so you have now ra kasra followed by the hamza. Now the hamza sits on its own at the end with alif maqsura, as indicated. As we said in the manuscript, they didn't write hamza at the very beginning. This tradition developed a bit later. So clearly consistent patterns in writing the word which is preceded with a kasra. So you can see how it becomes alif maqsura. So what we've learned so far, that it is very important to know the qawaid of imla, the principle, the rules of writing, and especially when you have a word or a verb which is hamzated. You can have a verb with a hamza at the middle or the beginning or at the end, and our example was at the end and some of them in the middle, because of this this damir or the pronouns that are attached to it. If you were to go to some classical works, and this is what you have: قرئ ذكر الداني أن الهمزة المتطرفة ترسم ياء إذا كان قبلها كسر. So he is saying الداني in his al-muqni, he says that the hamza at the end, the terminal hamza, is written with the ya إذا كان قبلها كسرا. So if before it there was a kasra, like Korea ra has a kasra, so this is how this form is written. It's not written as a waw or an alif. And ذكر أبو داود أنه في الأعراف والانشقاق ترسم الهمزة ياء لتطرفها وكسر ما قبلها. So Abu Dawood, he writes that in Al-A'raf 7:204 and Al-Inshiqaq, these two places, it is written with the hamza with the ya, like his قرئ, because the terminal hamza and وكسر ما قبلها in a kasra, or the e sound, this vowel before it. So now we have a classical precedent in terms of how they understood the mushafs should have been written. So what we have demonstrated, just going back again, that this particular scholar, unfortunately, he needs to invest more time perhaps learning the Arabic language rather than producing very misleading and misguiding videos for his Patreons.